Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer presented by the English Lit channel on YouTube. Today, we're impartially unpacking Marxist theory. Now, we aren't looking at this as a political manifesto. Instead, we're using it as a diagnostic framework. It's actually a surprisingly powerful lens we can use to understand our modern market dynamics, our consumer habits, and of course, the literary culture surrounding us. Here's the roadmap for today. We'll start with the Marxist historical framework, then move into maintaining the social order, commodity fetishism and alienation, the commodification of everything, and finally, literature and artistic revolt. We're basically zooming all the way from massive socioeconomic systems right down to exactly how we shop and what we read today.
Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, the Marxist historical framework, from tribal hordes to modern capitalism.
According to this theory, human history doesn't just, happen randomly. It's actually divided into 7 successive historical modes of production. So it starts way back in prehistory with tribal hordes and Neolithic kinship societies. Then it moves through ancient slaveholding societies, into medieval feudalism, and right up to our modern era, which is capitalism. This current mode is defined by an ongoing conflict between the bourgeoisie, those are the folks who own the means of production, and the proletariat, the people who actually provide the labor. In the predicted future of this whole framework, a triumphant communist mode.
Now, under these different modes of production, society is basically split into 2 distinct layers. Think of it like a building. You have the socioeconomic base, which includes all your economic elements, labor and production. This base fundamentally supports and shapes the cultural superstructure. What that means is your politics, the legal system, religion, and even the arts are all heavily dictated by the underlying economic realities of the society you live in. The money shapes the culture, not the other way around. Moving right along to Section 2, maintaining the social order, or how ruling ideology circulates.
The really crucial point here is this idea of hegemony. Basically, it's the continuous ideological domination of all classes by the ruling bloc. And this domination leads to what Marxists call false consciousness. See, when working-class individuals subscribe to the ideas and values of the wealthy elite, they're exhibiting false consciousness. Why? Because those elite values completely ignore the harsh socioeconomic realities of their own everyday working-class lives. They're essentially adopting a mindset that goes completely against their own realities.
So how exactly do they maintain this order? Well, enter Louis Althusser's concept of ideological state apparatuses, or ISAs. Think about your church, your school, your family, or the media you consume every single day. These are nonviolent institutions operating totally outside official state power, like the police or the military. Yet, according to the theory, these are the exact tools used to quietly transmit the ruling ideology into our daily routines, until it just feels like common sense.
Let's zoom in a bit for Section 3, Commodity Fetishism and Alienation, where we'll be analyzing the modern shopping experience.
To really wrap our heads around the modern market, we have to contrast 2 absolutely critical concepts: use value and exchange value. Imagine a carpenter builds a sturdy table, strictly to eat dinner on in their own home. That table has use value. It's genuinely useful to them. But under capitalism, goods are produced primarily for monetary exchange and profit. So if that same carpenter builds a table specifically to sell for cash, they're dealing in exchange value. The labor itself is being bought and sold, rather than just being applied by individuals for their own personal use.
And this brings us right to the core concept of commodity fetishism. It perfectly captures that familiar fascination we've all felt standing before a glittering, pristine new smartphone or a flawless pair of sneakers in a brightly lit store. We are totally mesmerized by the object itself, completely forgetting the paid and, let's be honest, often exploited human labor that actually assembled it. The commodity is fetishized. It's almost magically divorced from its human origins.
Now, the flip side of that glittering shopping experience is alienation. Because use value is entirely displaced by cash exchange, workers become totally disconnected from their own labor. Think back to our carpenter. A factory carpenter assembling identical table legs for 8 hours a day doesn't really care about the final table, right? Their labor has simply been traded for a wage. They are completely alienated from the product, from the process, and ultimately from the intrinsic value of their own creativity.
Which leads us nicely into Section 4, the commodification of everything, and the creeping reach of market forces.
Marxist critics use the term commodification for this accelerating phenomenon, where the pursuit of exchange value overtakes areas of life we honestly used to think were completely untouchable by the market. Everything, and I mean literally everything, becomes a product to be bought, sold, and traded for profit, from the water we drink to those DNA sequencing kits we casually buy online.
Just look at how incredibly wide-ranging this is today. According to the critics, everything from corporate pollution credits to deeply personal underground music scenes and even the search for love, hello, premium dating app subscriptions, can now be purchased as a commodity. It seems like absolutely no sphere of human existence is immune to the logic of the market.
This naturally leads theorists to a rather bleak warning against something called reification. Reification is basically what happens when human relationships are reduced to mere objects with price tags attached. Think about our modern obsession with personal branding. In a highly competitive, commodified market, human beings literally begin to view each other and even themselves as assets to be evaluated based on market value, rather than, our intrinsic humanity.
Finally, let's look at Section 5, Literature and Artistic Revolt, and how we actually push back against the system.
From this Marxist perspective, culture and the arts are never just innocent entertainment. But hey, it's not all doom and gloom. Art isn't just a passive mouthpiece for the ruling class. Literary texts actually contain mixed, contradictory messages and provide counter-hegemonic images. They protest ruling systems, they highlight society's contradictions, and they suggest liberatory possibilities. Basically, art fights back.
A perfect example of this is the stylistic concept of heteroglossia, coined by Mikhail Bakhtin. It refers to the complex stratification of language into different dialects, generational slang, professional jargon, and class mannerisms. Books like James Joyce's Ulysses use a chaotic, amazing carnival of these different languages to actively revolt against dominant, official, standardized styles of writing. It's literally a linguistic rebellion.
However, contemporary cultural studies scholars do point out a massive roadblock here: the market's incredible ability to co-opt this resistance. Radical vanguard movements like surrealism, punk rock, or gangster rap start out as fierce artistic rebellions, but very quickly, the hegemonic order incorporates them, completely diffusing their radical force. Suddenly, you're buying a mass-produced punk rock t-shirt at a corporate megamall. The rebellion just becomes another genre in the marketplace.
Which leaves us with this provocative final question. If the capitalist system can take the most outrageous, radical, artistic rebellion and seamlessly turn it into a hot news story and a profitable commodity, can we ever truly oppose the hegemonic order? Or is every act of defiance destined to become just another product with a price tag? It's a pretty fascinating framework to apply next time you're browsing a bookstore or scrolling your feed. Thanks for joining this explainer, and keep questioning the structures around you.